Growing up in a family where love felt conditional, I always knew I was living in someone else's shadow. But life has a way of flipping the script, and sometimes the quietest person ends up holding all the power. What happened next was unexpected, dramatic, and completely changed everything I thought I knew about family. Growing up, I was always the other son. My parents made sure I knew that. My older brother, Daniel, was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Every test he passed, every trophy he brought home, every time he so much as opened his mouth, it was treated like some grand accomplishment. Meanwhile, I was more of a cautionary tale. If Daniel was the shining example, I was the benchmark of what not to be. It wasn't that I was a bad kid. I did fine in school, I stayed out of trouble, and I had my own interests. But to my parents, I was never enough. If I got a B, they'd ask why I couldn't get an A like Daniel. If I achieved something, they'd point out how Daniel had already done it better, earlier, or with less effort. It was like I was living in his shadow, except my parents were the ones making sure I never saw the sun. By high school, the divide became brutal. Daniel got brand new gadgets, praise from teachers relayed at the dinner table, and money for extracurriculars. Me? I got lectures, criticism, and comparisons. Daniel and I weren't even close as brothers. He grew comfortable with being the favorite, and instead of reaching back to pull me up, he stood taller on the pedestal our parents built for him. I don't think he ever hated me. He just didn't care. And maybe that hurt even more. Fast forward a few years. I'd clawed my way into college on scholarships and part-time jobs because my parents made it clear they weren't going to help. "We can't afford to pay for both of you," they'd said, even though Daniel got full financial support when it was his turn. So I worked nights, studied during the day, and slowly built myself into someone who didn't need their approval anymore. After graduation, things started looking up for me. I landed a good job, then a better one, then got promoted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to survive. I was thriving. And that's exactly when my parents decided to suddenly remember I existed. It started small. A call here and there asking for a little help with bills or a quick loan to fix the car. I didn't think much of it. They were my parents, after all, and even though they hadn't been there for me, I didn't want to be cruel. I wired the money without hesitation. But soon, the requests became more frequent. Every month, there was something new: medical bills, home repairs, emergencies that never seemed to end. Thousands were leaving my account, but the gratitude I expected never came. Instead, it felt like they just assumed I'd pay, like it was my duty. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe they were just struggling more than I realized. But deep down, something in me started to itch, this uncomfortable feeling that there was more to the story than they were letting on. One night, after another transfer for unexpected expenses, I couldn't shake the suspicion anymore. I decided to dig. I asked my parents for specifics, receipts, bills, anything. At first, they dodged the questions, saying things like, "Oh, you don't need to worry about the details, just know you're helping us keep things together." That only made me more suspicious. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove back to their house unannounced. I figured if they were truly drowning in financial problems, I'd see some sign of it. What I saw instead almost made me laugh from the absurdity. Daniel, my golden boy brother, was back. Not just visiting, but fully moved in. His car was in the driveway, his stuff was in his old room, and he was sitting at the kitchen table like he'd never left. The emergencies I'd been funding weren't just about my parents' needs, they were about him. Turns out, Mr. Perfect had fallen on hard times. Lost his job, blew through his savings, and instead of hustling like I had to, he crawled back to mommy and daddy. And instead of telling me the truth, they used me like an ATM to cover for him. The kicker? When I walked in, Daniel didn't even look embarrassed. He gave me this half smile, like he was the one doing me a favor by gracing the house with his presence. My parents rushed to explain, fumbling over excuses. "Daniel's just going through a rough patch. He needs time to get back on his feet." We didn't want to worry you. Worry me? They didn't want to ruin the image of their golden boy. They wanted me to quietly bankroll his failure. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The shock gave way to anger. And that anger started to twist into something else. I didn't just want to stop giving them money. I wanted to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I didn't hold back that night. I sat down across from Daniel and my parents and asked them straight up why they thought it was okay to lie to me. My mom immediately went into defense mode, talking about how families are supposed to support each other, how Daniel was just going through a phase, how I was so lucky to be doing well. That word, lucky, set me off. Lucky? As if my years of busting my ass working 2 jobs through college, networking, grinding my way up the ladder, were just some stroke of fortune. Meanwhile, Daniel, who had been spoon-fed support and praise his whole life, got to sit back at home while I footed the bill. I turned to him and asked, "So, what's your excuse? Why couldn't you come to me yourself? Why hide behind mom and dad's phone calls?" Daniel barely flinched. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Because I knew you wouldn't understand. You've always had this chip on your shoulder about me. I didn't need your judgment on top of everything else." His arrogance floored me. No apology, no shame, just entitlement, wrapped in a thin layer of self-pity. He even tried to spin it like I was the problem, for not being supportive enough. My parents nodded along, like he was speaking gospel. I could feel my blood boiling. For years, I'd lived with their constant comparisons, their disregard, their blind devotion to him. And now, even when I was the one holding everything together, I was still the villain in their eyes. That was the moment my anger crystallized into clarity. They'd made me the outsider my entire life. Fine, but if they wanted to rely on me now, then they were going to learn what it felt like to be on the losing end. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore, it was a decision. After that confrontation, I drove home buzzing with adrenaline and rage. It was like my whole childhood had been shoved back in my face in one evening. The favoritism, the comparisons, the way they dismissed me, it had all led to this moment where I was, once again, nothing but a resource for them to drain while Daniel sat comfortably in his throne. At first, I couldn't think straight. Part of me wanted to cut them off completely, block their numbers, and be done with all of it. Another part of me wanted to scream until they finally understood how much damage they'd done. But neither of those felt satisfying. Not anymore. Because here's the truth. They'd never understood me, never respected me, never even tried to see me as their equal. And if I just walked away, they'd still find some way to paint me as the ungrateful son while protecting Daniel's fragile ego. So instead, I let myself sit in that anger. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made alone, every dollar I'd earned the hard way, every time I'd bitten my tongue while they worshipped him. And slowly, my fury sharpened into something colder, something more deliberate. I wasn't just going to stop helping them. I was going to make sure that my parents, and Daniel especially, felt what it was like to be powerless. I wanted them to choke on the reality they'd built for themselves, where Daniel was untouchable and I was disposable. That night, lying awake, I started sketching out the first threads of a plan. And the more I thought about it, the more the idea of revenge didn't just feel like payback. It felt like justice. In the days that followed, I kept my cool. I still answered my parents' calls, still pretended everything was normal, even sent over a little money here and there just to keep them comfortable. But in the back of my mind, the plan was taking shape. If there was one thing my parents loved as much as Daniel, it was appearances. They lived for the image of being a respectable family with a brilliant son. They bragged about him to neighbors, family friends, anyone who'd listen. Even now, with him unemployed and hiding in their house, they still spoke about him like he was destined for greatness. That was their weak spot. They needed Daniel to look like a success, no matter the reality. And Daniel? He needed someone to keep bailing him out, because he had no idea how to function without a safety net. Between the three of them, they were tangled in this little web of lies and denial. All I had to do was tug on the right threads. The idea was simple at first: expose the truth. Make their precious golden boy's failures public in a way they couldn't cover up. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that humiliation alone wasn't enough. I wanted them to depend on me, desperately, just like I'd once wished they'd support me. And then I'd pull the rug out from under them. So I started laying groundwork, asking questions, feigning concern, poking around Daniel's situation, seeing just how deep his problems went. And oh, it turned out they went deep. Credit card debt, an old DUI charge resurfacing. He'd even burned bridges with a few old employers. My parents knew some of it, but not all. And they had no idea how quickly it could all come crashing down. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. I wasn't just going to teach them a lesson. I was going to orchestrate a downfall so loud and undeniable that even they couldn't pretend their golden boy still shined. I knew I couldn't just go at this head on. If I exploded too early, they'd circle the wagons around Daniel like they always did, and I'd be cast as the bitter, jealous son. No, I needed them to invite me in, to trust me, to lean on me more than ever before. That way, when the moment came, the fall would be devastating. So I started playing the role of the supportive brother. I called Daniel up, asked him about his plans, listened while he rambled about vague job opportunities that never materialized. I pretended to believe him. I even offered advice that he never took. To my parents, I acted like I was finally stepping into the role of the responsible son who would help guide Daniel back to stability. It worked. They started coming to me with everything. Can you help Daniel update his resume? Could you cover his car payment this month, just until he gets settled? Maybe you can talk to your company about hiring him. They had no idea I was gathering ammunition with every word. Behind the scenes, I started pulling strings. I reached out to people I knew in finance, in HR, even a buddy in collections. I made sure I understood exactly how deep Daniel's debt ran, what kind of trouble he was in legally, and where he'd burned his bridges. I didn't need to fabricate anything. His mess was already bad enough. I just needed to shine a spotlight on it. The plan was starting to take shape. I'd help set up a situation where Daniel, and by extension, my parents, would be publicly exposed. Not just a small embarrassment, but something they couldn't hide from neighbors, friends, or extended family. Something that would strip away the illusion of the golden boy once and for all. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being underestimated. I was the one holding all the cards. It didn't take much to make Daniel trip over himself. He was cocky, careless, and so used to being protected that he never saw the cracks forming beneath him. All I had to do was give him little pushes in the right direction. One night, I casually suggested to my parents that maybe Daniel should prove to everyone he was back on track. I floated the idea of him attending a family gathering, our cousin's engagement party, where he could network and show everyone he was doing fine. My parents loved it. They were practically glowing at the thought of parading their golden boy in front of relatives again. Daniel, of course, resisted at first. He mumbled something about not wanting to deal with judgmental people, but after my parents insisted, and after I dropped a hint that I could help him look good, he agreed. That was step one. Step two was more subtle. I offered to help him out by giving him a little extra money for clothes, a haircut, even covering the gas to get there. What he didn't know was that I'd arranged for some of his creditors to start reaching out around the same time. Nothing too aggressive yet, just enough to rattle him, to make him nervous. By the time the party rolled around, Daniel was a bundle of fake confidence layered over simmering panic. Perfect. My parents, oblivious, were busy bragging to anyone who would listen about how Daniel was exploring new opportunities and how proud they were of his resilience. And that's when the first crack showed. One of my cousins, who happened to work in finance, casually asked Daniel about his new job. Daniel froze. He hadn't realized the lie my parents had been telling wasn't aligned with the one he'd been telling. He stumbled, made something up, and I watched the suspicion spread across the room like wildfire. It was just the beginning. The trap was tightening, and soon enough, Daniel wouldn't be able to wriggle free. The party was supposed to be Daniel's big comeback moment, but it turned into a slow-motion disaster. Every relative had a question, and Daniel's lies started tripping over each other. One uncle asked about the promotion my parents had bragged about. Daniel blinked, stammered, and muttered something about consulting work. A cousin pressed for details. What company? What clients? And Daniel deflected with a weak laugh. It was painful to watch, but I stayed quiet, sipping my drink, letting the awkward silence stretch. Then the real hammer dropped. Remember those creditors I'd quietly nudged? Well, one of them worked fast. Midway through the evening, Daniel's phone buzzed with a call he couldn't ignore. He stepped outside to take it, but the conversation carried through the thin patio doors. Words like overdue balance and collections weren't exactly subtle. When he came back inside, red-faced and sweaty, everyone knew something was off. My parents scrambled to save face. My mom jumped in with a shaky laugh, saying Daniel was handling some business and that it was nothing serious. But the damage was done. Whispers spread, side eyes exchanged, and the golden image they'd spent years polishing started to crack right in front of them. I didn't gloat, didn't say a word. I just watched. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of embarrassment. They were, and I could see the panic in their eyes, the dawning realization that their perfect son wasn't untouchable after all. But this was only Act 1. I wasn't finished yet. After the party, the ride back to my parents' house was dead silent. Daniel sat in the back seat, staring at his phone like it might magically erase his problems. My mom clutched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, and my dad just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. As soon as we got inside, it all erupted. My mom laid into Daniel, asking how he could embarrass them like that, why he hadn't told them things were so bad. How could he let everyone see him like that? My dad, normally quiet, actually raised his voice too. We vouched for you. We put our reputation on the line. And Daniel? He did what he always did, shifted the blame. He said, "You shouldn't have forced me to go." He said, "It's not my fault the economy is trash." He even had the audacity to turn to me and snap, "You set me up, didn't you?" I didn't deny it outright. I just smiled. That smile alone was enough to make him lose it. He lunged into this rant about how I'd always been jealous, how I'd always wanted to tear him down because I couldn't measure up. My parents tried to shush him, but the words were out, and for the first time in my life, I watched them flinch at his behavior instead of mine. It was almost surreal. The golden boy's halo was slipping, and they couldn't stop it. But here's the thing. They still weren't ready to let go of their fantasy. After the yelling died down, my mom turned to me with tearful eyes and said, "You're the strong one. Can't you help your brother get back on track?" That was the moment I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. They were desperate, humiliated, and clinging to me for support. And that's when my plan shifted from just exposing Daniel to crushing all three of them in one blow. After the confrontation, I spent the next week quietly plotting. I had all the pieces I needed: Daniel's debts, his shaky professional reputation, and my parents' obsession with appearances. But I didn't want to just humiliate them again. I wanted it to hit so hard that they couldn't sweep it under the rug. I decided on a plan that was equal parts clever and theatrical. I would create a scenario where Daniel's failures, their enabling, and their reliance on me would all be exposed simultaneously, loud, public, and undeniable. But it had to look like an accident, or at least something beyond my direct interference. Step 1. I got in touch with a few of Daniel's old clients and employers under the guise of helping him network. Carefully, I asked the right questions to ensure his past mistakes and burned bridges would surface. Step 2. I reached out to a mutual family friend with connections to the local press, casually suggesting that a story about how someone overcame hardship to succeed could be inspiring, while Daniel and my parents thought it was about me. Finally, I orchestrated a scenario where Daniel would be invited to a charity gala alongside my parents, his perfect stage to shine. What they didn't know was that all the checks, the donors, the journalists, they'd all have pieces of information about his failures ready to surface. And I would be there, quietly observing, ready to watch their reactions when the facade crumbled. By the time the night of the gala arrived, the tension was electric. Daniel was nervous, but still arrogant enough to think he could charm his way through it. My parents were gleaming with pride, completely unaware that the ground beneath their golden boy, and themselves, was about to collapse. And I had never felt so alive. The gala started beautifully, just as my parents had hoped. Daniel was charming, wearing his best suit, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments. My parents glowed, proudly introducing him to anyone who would listen. Then it began. First, one of the journalists I discreetly contacted cornered Daniel with a few pointed questions about his current projects. He smiled nervously, trying to dodge, but the questions kept coming, subtle at first, then sharper. A whisper here, a curious glance there, and I could see the first flickers of panic in my parents' eyes. Next, one of Daniel's old clients appeared, coincidentally, or so they thought, bringing up contracts he had left incomplete. Daniel's excuses faltered under the weight of names, dates, and documented evidence. My parents' smiles faded. Their pride curdled into horror as the whispers around the room grew louder. Finally, I stepped back and let it hit the crescendo. Someone called out Daniel's name, asking him to comment on the reports of overdue debts and legal notices. He froze, spluttering, realizing he couldn't charm his way out. My parents were red-faced, trying to salvage the situation, but every word they uttered only made it worse. The room buzzed with curiosity and judgment. Daniel's perfect image, the one my parents had built and protected for years, shattered in real time. And the best part? Everyone thought I was merely a supportive brother standing quietly in the background, while in reality, I had orchestrated the entire exposure. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one hiding in the shadows. I was the one holding the power, and I finally felt what it was like to watch them stumble under their own illusions. The fallout didn't stop at the gala. The next day, the house was a war zone. My parents were silent at first, pacing, whispering to each other like they were trying to figure out how to contain the embarrassment. Daniel, on the other hand, was frantic. He called me nonstop, begging me to explain, to fix it, to smooth things over with the family and the friends who had witnessed his unraveling. I listened carefully. I didn't yell, I didn't gloat. I just let him stew in the panic he'd never imagined he'd face publicly. Meanwhile, my parents tried to bargain and negotiate, insisting that I somehow help them salvage Daniel's reputation. They begged, pleaded, cried, even tried to guilt me with "we've always supported you, haven't we?" But I had learned that their support was conditional, based on favoritism and appearances. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They were finally experiencing the same helplessness I had endured for years. Daniel realized that being the golden boy wasn't a shield. It was a fragile mask that could crack the moment reality showed up. And my parents realized that enabling him had consequences, and that their favorite son wasn't untouchable. I stayed calm, letting the chaos unfold around me, knowing that they couldn't manipulate this situation as they had manipulated me my whole life. I had flipped the script, and the emotional pendulum swung fully in my favor. By the time the dust settled, the family dynamic had completely shifted. Daniel was shell-shocked. His arrogance was gone, replaced with a mix of shame, frustration, and a reluctant respect for me. He no longer sneered or assumed the world would bail him out. For the first time, he faced the reality of his own choices. My parents, meanwhile, were humbled. Their endless favoritism and blind worship of Daniel had backfired spectacularly. They couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore, and I could see them grappling with the guilt of years spent undervaluing me. I didn't rub it in. I didn't gloat. I let them feel the weight of their own actions. My revenge wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about forcing them to confront the consequences of their neglect and favoritism. Daniel eventually left the house, humbled and wary, and my parents stopped asking me for bailouts. Slowly, a new balance emerged. I realized that respect and equality couldn't be demanded. They had to be earned, and I had finally earned mine. For the first time, I felt free from the shadow I'd lived under my entire life.